Thank you, Southern California. So fun. This is going to be really fun, you guys. And it's going to be very conversational and interactive if you want it to be. And so there'll be some fun questions and hopefully it'll be engaging and helpful. So this is great. Oh, I see someone from Michigan. I was born in Lansing, Michigan. So another Midwesterner. Cape Town,
Ooh,
South
South
Africa.
Africa. Wow.
Yeah. I feel like we should give someone an award for being like the furthest away. South Africa might be it right now.
Great.
To,
Well,
to
it
my
looks like people have the attendees have kind of evened out. I don't see like a mass influx of people joining. So
okay.
we might as well get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mercedes with Rocky Nook, and I'm here with author and photographer Chris Orwig and Rocky Nook's own Ted Waitt. Before I let them take over and get started, I just want to note that we're doing this webinar to celebrate the audiobook release of Chris's Authentic Portraits, which is available now on rockynook.com. If you are here in this webinar, you got the email, so that link to download the audiobook and purchase it is in your email, as well as a coupon code for the audiobook and for the print or ebook version. So check that email again. Whatever version of the book you want, there's a coupon for it in that email. And I just want to let you know also that this webinar is being recorded and you will be sent a replay of this tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. If you have to leave early or if you missed something or you just want to hang out with Chris Orwig again, you'll have that video available to you tomorrow. And then this is just kind of a conversation. So if you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the chat or in the Q&A box. Either one, we will see it and we'll be happy to take your questions. So thank you all for joining us. Chris and Ted, I'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay. I hadn't really thought of us as like Chris and Ted, but obviously it like harkens back to the Bill and Ted. So Ted, I'm sure you get that a lot.
I do.
Yes. So no, nothing new, but everyone's so glad to be here. And Mercedes, thanks for helping coordinate this. And really, this is going to be a fun conversation. You know, as you saw in the email and everything about how do we capture meaningful portraits, and then how do we become more creative? Because life and photography are obviously interconnected, and in a really deep way, especially in portraiture. So I'm excited to be here, you guys. And then Ted, it's funny, we didn't really talk about how we totally started off, but I did say, I guess I would introduce myself and then you're going to introduce yourself. So let me do that. For those of us who haven't met, I know I see some friends, Joel, it's great to see you there, and some other folks there. So I'm a photographer and author and teacher, really the three things I do related to photography. But then I also love getting outdoors, hiking, biking, surfing, swimming, and doing all sorts of stuff. And that's important because that shapes the type of portraits I create. So I'm kind of sharing that intentionally. And the kind of portraits that you create really are going to come from who you are and what you're interested in. And that you'll see that thread kind of go throughout this. So welcome everyone, and great to see you. And Ted, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. Chris is forcing me to do this webinar with you guys. So
I am.
But I am actually excited to do it, and it's cool to just be on the other side of the book, if you will, for a few minutes. So I'm Ted Waitt, and I'm associate publisher here at Rocky Nook, and I kind of come up on the editorial side of things over many years, and I've worked for coming on 20 years in this part of the world, working with photography books and great photographers who are great authors and teachers, and that's the basics for me. I do see hello from New Orleans. I'm from New Orleans myself, so hello, Michael. I also saw Damon out there, so I don't want to just shout out too many people, but hello to Damon. And so that's that. That's my intro. So I think what Chris and I talked about doing was, in a celebration of authentic portraits, both the book and the recent release of the audiobook, we thought we would just have kind of an informal Q&A. And so we really welcome everybody to jump into the chat or the Q&A section of the Zoom interface and throw out some questions whenever something occurs to you that we're talking about, or on or off topic. And so we really want this to be less of a 30-minute presentation followed by questions and more of just kind of an open conversation that's fun for everyone. So I'll start it off with a question for you, Chris. And it's a bit of a softball, but it is, how do you've been teaching for many years, you've written a bunch of books, you've just done your first official audiobook, as far as I know. And so that, you've come to teaching photography students for years. And, is there a best way to learn photography? What is the best way that you have found in terms of teaching?
Yeah. So thanks, Ted. And then also I did make Ted do this, like he was saying, and Ted and I are super good friends. And when you have a relationship with someone that you work with, like in editing a book, like it's really a collaboration. So a lot of Ted is in the book. I'm obviously writing it, but he's helping me shape that. So it's really fun to get to do this in this way. But yeah, my heart really is teaching, and it's taking people from either, there's different transitions, good to great, mediocre to magnificent, zero, starting out to hero, or whatever it is. But basically I want to help people figure out how they get better. And so that's really where I'm coming from when I'm writing, or when I'm speaking, or when I'm doing tutorials or whatever. So, which I love this question, which is great, is what are the best ways to learn photography? Because we now have so many different avenues for that. And one of the things that I've found is that watching videos is really important. That's one aspect of it, but watching can be just like entertaining. I see a couple questions coming in the Q&A, which is awesome. We'll get those in a second. But sometimes if you just watch and you don't reflect or take that inward journey, you don't learn as much. So that's where I think books come in. They allow you to underline and pause and really reflect deeper on something. It's kind of like the difference between watching a movie and reading a book on, like, Harry Potter or something with my kids, right? You can stop for a second and really think about something. And then the next thing is, of course, is to put it into practice and to explore how you're not just seeing someone else do it or thinking nice thoughts, but you're starting to really do something. And so what I found for me is I absorb content, obviously in written form, but audiobooks are amazing because I like to run and hike and bike and do all these things, and even just go for a walk and listen to something. And so, and I see someone put the question there, if you have the book, why would you buy the audio version? What's different or better? And I think it's just a different way to access the content. And maybe I'm going to go, Ted, if this is okay, we're kind of go off script here a little bit, but to poetry,
There's no
I love, yeah, there is no script, right? But I love reading poetry, but sometimes hearing poetry read from the actual author, I absorb it differently because I'm using different sort of muscles or different ways to reflect. So I think that's part of it. It's just another way to gain access to this content, because a lot of this book, it's funny, it's about portraiture, but a lot of it is about who we are and how we live and how we think. And so this is a long-winded answer, but the best way to learn photography is with multiple modalities. I've seen too many photographers fall in the trap of just watching video after video after video after video after video, and they think they're good, but they're not growing. They're not, they're just, it's almost like watching too many movies, back to back or something. You got to stop all the watching. So I find watching, reading, listening, and then doing, those are great ways, at least for me, to do it. Would you echo that, Ted? Or there's probably something else I've missed too. I mean, there's always like in person, which we can't do that much of now, and conferences, which are great.
I absolutely echo that. I remember one thing that we were talking about was I've heard some audiobooks that also have their verbatim, kind of narrated audiobooks. And then I have heard audiobooks where the author kind of goes, as you said, off script a bit. And because there's either an aside that kind of inspires or strikes them, or there's some other reason for that. And in this book, that exactly happens because there's obviously technical reasons to do so. There's a lot of pictures in this book, and a lot of that reading is straight and verbatim. And then a lot of the narration that, of course, you do, you also find yourself either explaining a picture or what's happening in a picture, or explaining the story behind a picture that might not be exactly as it appeared in the book. And I think that that's really kind of special and different,
Yeah. And that's kind of my hope there too, is to also help with like kind of the tone, because I'm just going to try to think of it, how sentences can be read different ways. Like, let's just say we need, I don't know what I'm trying to think of some sentence, but let's just say meaningful portraits are a result of deep inner reflection. Something we could read that kind of aggressively. Meaningful portraits are a result of deep inner reflection, or it could be meaningful portraits are a result of deep inner reflection. And then I might go off script and say, well, what is that? Or what is that for you? Or what is that for me? Now let's dig into it. And so I think having that conversational tone in an audiobook does add a little bit to it. It's not everywhere, but I had tried to add some of that too. So
yeah, sometimes you receive information differently.
yeah.
That way, right?
Yeah. And how about, I know we have, Ted and I just wrote down a couple other questions that we can ask too, but let me hit one in the Q&A, just that's there for now. It says, as you've gained experience at making portraits, what have you changed from the first years to current years when making portraits? And that's a great question, kind of that, which is progression, right? How do you progress? And the point of photography is the pictures you take at 16 should be different than 36, at 66, 86, whatever, we should grow and change as humans technically, but also emotionally, soulfully, all everything else. So for me, one of the things that hasn't changed is I'm always nervous. I was nervous back then. I'm still nervous now. And I've come to embrace that as just kind of part of the energy and the excitement of doing a portrait session, that it's something special and sacred. I think if I was apathetic, I would be worried, but I'm not. I'm always like, okay, there's no guarantee. I have to take a breath every time and say, okay, here we go. So that's definitely part of it. Another thing that has, so that's something that hasn't changed. Something really that has changed, I think, is kind of, I think I've gotten better at creating space. And what I mean by that is my dad designed and built the home I grew up in Northern California. Imagine rolling hills, oak trees, creeks, wall of windows, beautiful, beautiful home. And the space he created there is very inviting. Every time someone comes into that home, it's like, wow, it has a certain energy because of the way, the shape of the architecture. And I think as portrait photographers, while we don't physically build space, we create kind of emotional, energetic space. And I think I've gotten better at doing that. And because what happens is having your portrait made it's really hard. You have to be really vulnerable. And so one of the things, for example, that I don't ever do when I shoot is use music. And I have colleagues and friends who every time they shoot, they have a little portable Bluetooth speaker or whatever, and music's playing and it's creating vibe and energy. And I don't want any music, that's just me personally, to fill up that space. I want it to be calm and quiet and connected and conversational. And it takes kind of guts, I think, to create the space. It's much easier to throw in some happy music and get someone to kind of perk up. But I think one of the things that's helped me is just saying like, okay, no, it's worth it to do that. And part of that is, and maybe this is in the book or one of my other books, but comes from this one character that Steinbeck writes about, Doc Ricketts in Cannery Row. And he says, Doc was at ease with himself and it put him at ease with the world. And part of that, I think, is having the sense of ease myself, even though I'm not feeling, I'm nervous, I'm all that, just be like, okay. And then that then creates that space and allows for depth to occur. So at least that's for me. And then Ted, anything that resonates or doesn't?
Well, I
Or
guess it sparks a few questions for me.
yeah,
You're nervous, but are you kind of accepting the nervousness and working with it, or are you, because you don't look nervous at all?
yeah.
So a two-parter is, what do you do with the nervousness? Are you just kind of putting it in a box, or are you saying, acknowledging it and working with it? And then the second part of the question would be, you're talking about your father's house and the kind of the aura that it creates. Do people, have you noticed over the years in your portraiture, in the actual shooting, do people remark that you make them feel calm and relaxed? Does that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Those are good questions. So wait, the second part was comment, and then the first part was how do I sort of process or deal with the nervousness, because they come across as being calm, or try to, at least. Yeah, so the processing is huge for me, and what that has come from is from teaching. And what I've learned through teaching is that the more impressive the subject for one of my students, whether that's the more beautiful or handsome or the bigger celebrity they are, or maybe there's someone they admire, or maybe it's their dad who's, they're really nervous, whatever, the more important or significant that person is, the worse the photography. And what happens is you kind of fall apart, and it's sort of like, I don't know if Ted, you've ever had this experience, but I've had a couple of times where you meet a celebrity randomly and you just get too excited or something, and you say dumb things, or, versus like, oh, hey, I enjoyed, whoever it is, yeah, I enjoyed that film you did, or that was cool. You, rather than being that, you're sort at least for me, I'm sort of like, neat film. Wow, this is really exciting to meet you. And they're sort of like, okay, freak, back off, And so watching my students do it has really helped me realize, like, okay, Chris, don't go there. Like, this is an impressive person. Or like, I remember early in my career, there's someone I really, really admired. And I was talking with him. I said, I just got to tell you, I'm totally nervous right now because I admire, what you've done. He was a world champion surfer. I admire, the way you ride waves. I admire all you've done for, giving back. And I've always wanted to meet you. And so I'm really nervous. He's like, oh, Chris, don't worry about this, man. We got this. And so all of a sudden that made him come to my side versus just internalize that nervousness. And he's sort of like, what's wrong with this kid? Why, why is he so nervous? So sometimes I'll verbalize it. Sometimes I'll just say, hey, I am nervous, but the work of a photographer is to get excited or nervous or whatever. So it's the same thing when you're doing landscape or photographing the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. You're like, wow, this is amazing. Take that shot and then say, now do the work of photographer, which is more settled, which is more thoughtful, which is more engaged, which is more connected. And so for me with the nervousness, I shoot through it maybe, like I first shots aren't very good for me. And then I start asking questions, and then that gets it more human. And then, it's so funny to quote yourself, but this quote's in the book that, it's like, look, I'm always thinking, look at someone so deeply that you begin to see yourself. And this is true regardless of age, gender, political point of view, social economic status. But in other words, see the humanity in the person. And when you as a photographer can get past all the stuff that this is a tall person, this is a strong person, this is a power, whatever, all the labels, and you see human, then a good portrait can be made. So for me, I know I have to kind of take that journey to get there, because if someone super famous walks in or walks, and I'm about, I'm like, I'm starstruck. And then I have to say, okay, shoot that shot. It's kind of never good. And then say, do the work of a photographer. So that's how I do that. And then, yes, the second part of the question, I feel like I'm answering these questions so long, but hopefully you guys are liking this. If you're liking this, let us know, or, keep, there's some other questions coming, which we love. But yeah, people often reflect like, Chris, you made that so easy. That was so enjoyable. And my goal as a portrait photographer, and whenever I'm working with people in any context, lifestyle, fashion, whatever it is that I connect with the subject first, and then the photograph is second. And so I want them to feel that sincere connection. And so they often reflect that back. And part of that is being really, really tuned into what's happening with them. In other words, if I'm holding the camera up and I kind of see their lower eyelid quiver, which you see a lot, that's a sign they're uncomfortable. They can't control, you can't like say eyelid stop quivering or something, or you see tension, tension in hands a lot. Their hands are lower in the frame, but often you can see them kind of holding that in. Shoulders, obviously brows, but everyone carries it differently. So if I see a little sign of tension, then I let my camera come down and I just try to ask it, like, oh, that's a cool tattoo. What's the story? Then all of a sudden they go from tense to, oh man, my brother and I got this when we were 15 and I always regret it. And they're kind of laughing, and we're connected, and we're working through that. And then afterwards they'll say, man, you made that so easy. And it's because I didn't ignore that and just get the shot at all cost, if that makes sense. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that, thank you. There's, we've got some comments coming in saying, it's going well and you're not going on too long. So
Okay. Thanks, you guys.
people who are maybe not to speak for everyone, but I like just hearing you elaborate on some of these responses that could seem very simple, but just hearing you enunciate your thought process and what's going on internally, I think is helpful. Maybe connecting, we'll come back to John Kenny's question in just a minute, but I saw Marianne sent in a question about what are authentic portraits? Basically, what's this interesting sounding book all about? What you just said might actually be a key into that topic, where you said, the first thing is connecting with the subject before the photograph itself. And I wonder if maybe that's a way in to access, an idea of what is authentic portraiture to you.
Yeah.
Can you get a great picture if you haven't connected in that way? And if not, maybe authenticity is tied to that kind of connection.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Marianne, too, and Ted for framing it, setting up for me. We always find what we're looking for, right? So if we're in a city and someone said go out and find the letter E, all of a sudden we would see letter E's on the sign, or if it said go find blue cars, you would see the blue cars. And so whatever's happening inside of us shapes what's going on in front of us. So for me, authenticity is about a search and searching for something that's authentic or real. You're never going to like totally find it. So it's not about, yes, this is an authentic portrait, but it's more about your lean. Like I'm leaning into this idea that a good portrait isn't about how someone looks. It's about who they are. And, if you think of fashion is only about clothes. I mean, people wearing clothes, but it's ultimately clothes. Beauty is about close-up beauty work, or architecture is about a building, all these things. But so portraiture can be many different things. But for me, when you add that word authentic, it's a picture that someone would look at, if I were photographing someone famous or not, or whatever, that person's partner, spouse, parent, sister, brother would say, oh my gosh, you totally captured who they are. And that's then meaningful, right? It's not like this blown up idea of the person, but it's that humanity. So for me, I think that's what it is. And that's, what looks kind of casual and easy to get, let's say something authentic, is actually, for me at least, a ton more work than getting something contrived. Contrived is kind of easy. Good light, good person, good wardrobe, look this way, stand that, do these kind of things, this kind of right pose, boom, got it done. But I don't know if you've ever had your portrait taken, which I have. I always ask people to take my portrait as a way to learn. There's a lot of pictures I've seen of myself where I'm like, that's not me. That's I'm playing a character in your story. And that's fine, because they're the photographer. But the photographs that I want to make are less about creating my own narrative as finding their narrative, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you think it's worth getting into another kind of part of Marianne's question is about kind of the technical stuff?
Okay.
Is it worth getting into, or would you?
Yeah.
Setting or lighting and how that performs. I mean, we could probably talk about a technical stuff like nailing focus and lens choice. We can also talk about aesthetics and personal choices around. John Kenny's question too is about approaching strangers, for example, just to simplify it. How does that work? And then we've got another question about making people uncomfortable and doing that. It sounds like from what you just said, that's not exactly your vibe, although some obviously great images have been created that way.
Yes, a lot of great content here too. And what would be fun is maybe if you want to add to the comments or the Q&A or whatever is from what you all are thinking, what makes a meaningful portrait. Because I think when something's authentic, it's meaningful. I mean, these are broad, big terms, but what portraits are meaningful to you? And think about ones you've seen or of yourself, of your mom, of your sister, or whatever. Just, if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to add it there. But yeah, let's jump into a couple of those topics. So technically, my goal is to shoot anywhere, any time of day, in any light, in any place in the world. So it's a very nimble approach. And so what that means is I'm using natural and available light and trying to be very fluid and flexible. Most of the time when I do photo shoots, people don't know they're really happening. And then afterwards, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I mean, and then to give maybe one example, I've done a lot of work with Adobe. So when I meet with people at Adobe, I'll often say like, hey, let's walk outside and I'll take a picture. And I know some tricks about light, they're in the book, but it's like stand in the shadow, face the light, reflected light, look at the eyes, different things. But I'll take these pictures. And at one point I was speaking at an Adobe conference and I was looking through all the other Adobe employees there. More than half of them, I had taken their quote portrait or their headshot, and they didn't even know I was doing it. But then afterwards they're like, that's the best photo I've ever had of me. And so the reason I'm saying all that isn't like, wow, I'm great, but I'm saying like this approach is something you can use wherever you are, however you work. You don't need studio, you don't need lights, you don't need elaborate. Rather, you need to, kind of do that inward work, so to speak, inner journey. And then you have to, create the space, and then you have to try to connect and then capture the pictures that way. And then with strangers, that's one of the best ways to get good at portraiture because it's very condensed and also amplified. What I mean by condensed is you don't have 10 minutes with a stranger. You can't walk up to someone and say, hey, could I do a shoot with you for the next 30 minutes and really capture a soulful portrait? They would think you're crazy, right? And it would be crazy. So you have a short amount of time, and it's amplified in the sense of you have to connect really, really quickly. And so what I do for strangers, and obviously COVID, nice thing about portraits, naturally socially distanced, you're never closer than 6 feet. At least I'm not when I'm shooting. And so it is something you can still do now in lots of different forms. And obviously in ways that you're comfortable with and all that. But with strangers, what I do is my camera's always out. So it's on my shoulder or it's in my hand. And so if I'm approaching someone, I'm showing them subconsciously that I'm a photographer. They may not like really be cued into the camera, but they're like, I see something there. But if I say, stranger, can I take your picture? And then I reveal a camera, it's that reveal crushes your opportunities of getting something good. So you want it to be natural and fluid. And then I find a way to connect with them really quickly. So if I'm meeting someone, let's just say, I'm just going to go with Ted here. If I saw Ted on the street, I might say, that's a cool shirt, Ted, or like, what do you do? And he might say, or I might, some, that didn't really work, but sometimes you see people and you can pick up a little thing. You're like, oh, it looks, it seems like you do some kind of creative work. Cause I would say that of Ted, he looks like a very creative person. And he would say, well, yeah, actually I'm in book publishing and working with words. And I'd be like, no way. And then that would give me a little thread. And I could say, well, what kind of books? And then he would say this, and I'd say, oh, and if that goes down a dead end, he doesn't want to talk about it. I would try to find something else, like, well, what brought you to this part of town? It's like, oh, I've lived here for 30 years, and 30 years, it must have changed a lot. And, oh my God, yeah, you wouldn't believe how it's changed. Well, what was it like 30? Oh, it's like this. Oh, hey, I'm taking portraits of people who live in this neighborhood. Could I ever capture one of you? Because this has been such a part of your story. And, oh, are you kidding? Of course, do it over here. Come to this, and then all of a sudden I have this great photo of a stranger. And some of my friends will say, how did you get that? And it all started with a very simple, you can kind of felt how that unfolded. And sometimes you'll get the vibe like this person's busy, or like if you came up to me on a street and I needed to pick up my kids from school, I wouldn't be like, I'm going to stop everything and be so excited you want to take my picture. So I'm trying to pick up on that vibe, but it's a great way to practice. Now, here's the other tip for you guys. If you're like, that seems so horribly scary to me, I never want to do that. Fine. Another way to practice connecting is just when you see people in public. So for example, yesterday I was at the hardware store and a woman behind me had all of these boards and we were 6 feet apart. We were stuck in a long line, and I was just standing there and I was like, well, so what are you building? And she was like, oh, I'm building a planter box. And I was like, oh, like what kind of, like flowers? She said, oh no, herbs. And then she started getting all excited, telling me about herbs, and she was going to put in their planter. And so I'm practicing connecting with people when I'm at the hardware store, when I'm at my kids' game, anytime, so that when I have a camera and when I need to do the craft of portrait, it's not like I'm out of practice, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I also imagine that if you've approached a stranger and they're not into it, either you know that right away, or you discover it quite quickly and maybe what's built in, even if they have a very cool look, you kind of recognize that like, this is not maybe the best time to try to connect with this person. So I'll just let it go.
Yeah, just let it go and realize that the more beautiful or handsome a person, the more nervous they are to be photographed. I mean, that's an interesting dynamic, which you would think is the opposite. You would think, the most handsome guy walking on the street, but he's like, really nervous. I think the more, let's say, ordinary person is more like, oh, me? Oh, sure, thanks. And they're kind of, so it's reading their energy, reading the moment. Yeah, then letting it go. And it doesn't, like that quote, rejection, it's no big deal. If, someone doesn't want their portrait taken, fine. And then maybe to add to the other question, roll in that one was, what about difficult things with people? I'll definitely go difficult places with people when they invite me there. And I had led a workshop, was talking to the subject. There's like 30 of my students. There's this guy in the hot seat. He's this, and it's a picture in the book, one of my favorite pictures actually. And what I mean in the hot seat is everyone's staring at him. And when everyone's staring at you, it's hard to deal with that. But he's a Broadway performer, so he's kind of okay with that. And I'm just saying, like, hey, like, asking him about his family, da da da. And he's telling me different things. And he's like, yeah, and, my mom has MS. And I say, wow, what's that like, with your mom having MS? And he just like pauses. So he's inviting me into that. He could have said, yeah, it's challenging, and bounced off of it and kept going. But instead he paused. He actually, his eyes started to tear up. And, so we went to a difficult place. And then in the portrait, you can see there's this sense of really, I don't know, depth and love and soulfulness and honesty, all these things in the picture. So it's not just about being happy, snappy, and bopping around, pleasantly. But I will never, if I know his mom has MS, I would never say, your mom has MS and is in a horrible place right now. Think about her and let me take the picture, So I don't use negativity and to get a picture. He gave me that. I think it was almost therapeutic for him to sort of like bring that up. And it was about who he is and how he approaches life. And, it's his mom. He loves her, and it's hard for him, and that's okay. So.
Interesting. So when you, maybe this can come back to this. I'm now thinking of two other things. One is approaching strangers being related to this idea of a lot of people who don't want to do that are fearful,
Yeah.
And so fear is like a topic all by itself, probably, to discuss.
Right.
And the other is, John again asked, is there a mental process you go through when you're preparing for a portrait session? And that might be relevant. They might be related things.
Yes.
But either when you're walking around a city, potentially looking for interesting strangers to shoot, or you have a session scheduled, is there, how do you get yourself to your best place to connect?
Yeah, which is an amazing question. And this is actually very helpful because, when I titled this little thing was Capturing Meaningful Portraits and Living a More Creative Life. And a big part of that is the work done before the shoot. So for me, I meditate regularly. I, eat really healthy food. I try to cultivate inner kindness and peace and all those things, because if I don't, then the worst version or lesser version of myself shows up at the shoot. And with fear, when I really think about it, like if let's just say, let's take anger and let's take frustration, and then behind both of those is fear, because you're frustrated because something broke, and I can't, and so you're, versus just if you're at peace, you're like, oh, like I've done things where actually I had a shoot like a week and a half ago where I had two cameras, and for one reason, and I only had like a media card in each. I think it was a short shoot, but the media card had this error, one of those weird error messages you get, so I couldn't use my second camera. And so in that moment, I had to make that decision of just full frustration and anger, or like say, you know what, that's kind of funny. Like my second camera doesn't work. I guess I'm shooting with an 85 the whole time, because it's a one camera, one lens kind of thing. And so then that helps me get there. But if I hadn't have been grounded, and maybe I was super stressed out and that happened in the shoot, I would have probably expressed more frustration and anger. That whatever you express is reflected in your subject, not like one to one, but people pick up on where you're at, especially as photographers. What my students tend to do is they hold camera up in front of their face, they take the picture, then they look at it like, oh man, this is, and the subject meanwhile thinks, what did I do? And so they're either they're question, or they feel insecure, or they feel angry, or but meanwhile, it's just the photographer's like, they just had their exposure wrong, and so they're upset with themselves. And so all of that kind of stuff is, if you do that, obviously you do that and say, even if you notice something wrong, you say like, oh my gosh, I had my exposure wrong, let me do that again, sorry about that, and you fix it, and then you take the picture. And if you invite people into those things graciously, peacefully, it puts you at ease, it puts them at ease, and it results in a better picture. So with all of that stuff, I find the shoot isn't the moment to work through the fear. Maybe this is a long way of saying that. Like people who think like they can be really stressed out and then show up shooting and, and not be, no, it doesn't work that way, and so if I have a big shoot, I make sure I get a good bike ride in. I make sure I've done my meditation. I make sure I'm thinking about things, because I know I'm going to be nervous. And what nervousness is a mixture of excitement, a big mixture of uncertainty, and I can either embrace and walk into that uncertainty, or just kind of be shut down by it. And you don't want that. No one wants that. So yeah.
Well, and then connected to that is a question from Jared asking, essentially, are you always in full control of everything you just said? Can you prepare yourself always for, what happens? Do you ever have a bad day? Do you ever walk in and that camera not working actually does get to you and frustrate you? Do you either, if you're not feeling it from the beginning, can you find a way to fake it? Or
yes, yeah, that's a great question.
Can you recenter?
I think to talk about that is, and let's say, I'm sure everyone listening is probably in the same boat, because by the time you get here, you're kind of interested in this topic, and you're probably kind of interested in photography, and you kind of get some of what we're talking about. So what I'm saying is, I think we're all in the same boat in this when I tell this story, which is, this is about 3 weeks ago. I had done a shoot, and I'm all about connecting with people. And for the most part, I can connect with people. You know what I mean? I'm not like an abrasive person. I'm not, hopefully I'm not like overly like digging into their life, but I'm just, it's like, I'm sure like you, Ted, or Mercedes, or the rest of you on this call, generally you meet people and there's like either a neutral or slightly positive response, so I'm starting at like a decent baseline. But I did this one shoot where it was like, I started like way down here. Like the person was like so not interested in the shoot, so not interested in me or any of my antics. I have no idea what was going on. It could be all about me. It could have been about her. And so none of my tricks, so to speak, were working. None of my, like my questions, like, so, like, what are your interests? Like horses. What about horses? They're animals. And I'm like, I didn't, like, what, how do you recover from that? So either it's maybe the subject that's not working, or maybe myself. The last thing I want to be doing is be peaceful. And I'm just so frustrated internally because I don't know, maybe I just broke a lens, or something happened, or who knows what. So in either situation, so when it's my fault, so to speak, I find a way to leave. And there's a leaf blower going on if you guys can hear that, but I find a way to leave. So for example, if I'm like shooting and I'm just pretend I'm photographing Ted, and I'm photographing this, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated right now. I cannot, I'm stressed out, or I'm nervous, or whatever. I would then say, Ted, hang on a second. I need to go grab something from my car, from my bag. And I would physically move, and movement helps me sort of cleanse that out of my system. And if I can't go get something, I say like, hey, why don't we walk over to that other tree? Even if there's no point in walking there, this tree's the same as that tree. The movement for me really helps me, like gives me a catch my breath, if that makes sense. And then, so that's when it's me. When it's the subject, I just say, wow, this is probably the challenge that I've needed. And what I mean by that is, it's really easy to photograph beautiful, outgoing, handsome, stunning, interesting athletes, artists, architects, poets, all these things, which, because some of those people just give you vulnerably themselves. And that's not that much of a challenge. And so when the challenge surfaces, I'm like, okay, this is actually what I needed. And so I'm, not to be overly Pollyanna or something, I'm kind of like, thank you. Like, okay. And maybe what I mean by that is I'll create that for myself. A friend of mine owns an IT company. He said, I need portraits of all 25 of my IT guys, or mostly guys, some girls. And he said, but I got to tell you, they hate having their picture taken. They're the most unphotogenetic group you've ever seen. And they are just going to dread doing this whole thing. Will you do it? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I did it for free. He's my friend, because I thought this is a great challenge to connect with people who are different than what I maybe normally photograph. Photographing a handsome surfer on a beautiful location, like not that hard, no offense. And so anyway, so that's something I would encourage you all to think of if you're like, well, I don't live in LA, or I don't live in New York, I don't have access to models, or I don't have access to ballet dancers, or I don't know, whatever it is. I totally disagree with the sentiment which says, if you want better pictures, stand in front of more interesting things. My approach is, if you want better pictures, find what's interesting in the world that you're in. Photograph your friends, your family, your dad, stick with that. Because if you can then, like, and I feel like it worked with that person who hated me and hated the moment, hated life. There were some good pictures there. And I did learn about how to be more subtle with my direction. I did learn about, what I realized was she needed to be in control more than me. And so I would just, like the client said, well, where should we go next? And I was like, I don't know. And then to the subject, I was like, well, what do you think? And she's like, well, that's the best spot right there. And I was like, great. And then I got, I gave her the control, then it leveled out. So that helped, versus just being like, dang it, this person's, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with me? And if you go down that negative spiral, it doesn't work in portraiture. It may work in other forms of life because you just power through it, grit your teeth, but portraiture, you need openness, vulnerability, connection, all that. So
yeah, it's interesting to hear that you're saying you've got these go-to tactics in terms of like going back to your car or movement, but at the same time, it's not this prescriptive list that works every time. You've got to remain open and kind of present and look around, see, pick up on what the other person is giving you and kind of respond accordingly.
Yes. Yeah. And it might be, I mean, those of you, I think we all have friends who are like this, sometimes you go to, let's think of pre-COVID, when you would go and meet someone for lunch or dinner or coffee, when we do all these more social things. And you have some friends where you're like, I don't know which version of the friend I'm going to get, the stressed out version, or the really excited version, or the overwhelmed version, or whatever. But you just take what you got, like, oh, they just came off of a really big day. Or I have two teenage daughters. She was super stressed this one day because she had this huge test. And it was like, yeah, this is Annie under the pressure of a big test. And I'm just operating in that world. That tomorrow will be a different version, just because different stuff's happening in her life. And I guess what all of this gets to is, as photographers, we forget to think about what's happening internally to the other person. We think of them as an exterior shell, as a look, but they're not. They're so complex. And so it's all about creating space for that and searching for that, and being real with who we are so they can be real with who they are, whatever that is, and then working from there. So
cool. Well, if people are so inclined, I would say we've got maybe a few more minutes for a couple more questions. Time has flown here, Chris. I'll throw you a curveball from Marvin, who asks, what suggestions would you give to sell or market oneself? So this is kind of a completely different, not completely different, different part of the overall package of what we're talking about here. How do you turn your portrait passion into profit? How do you market or sell portraiture these days?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always contextual. So what I mean by that is it's really thinking about where you live, who you have access to, what your interests are. So, I'll give sort of a general answer, but it always relates to that. So for example, if you're in Michigan and you're a big fan of the Detroit Tigers and you're also a yogi and you love plants, well, then that I know exactly what you're going to do. Something connected to baseball, something connected to yoga, something connected to plants. And you're going to start to find a plant influencer. They're out there. I have a friend who's one of them. She has this little plant company, and it's marvelous. And so then you do a shoot with that person, and then look for other people like that person who need photographs, because that person needs branding photos, and so you can do that. So basically, it's like search. And again, I'm just randomly out of a hat selecting, trying to an array of different interests. You search for interests that something that resonates with you. The worst thing you can do as an aspiring photographer, if you want to get work doing something, is go into an industry that isn't you. So let's say you're more about plants, but then there's also the oil industry, and you're like, well, I know all these people in the oil industry, but you're just going to despise everything about it, and whatever it is. I don't know what. I'm just trying to think of polar opposites or something. But maybe you love the oil industry. Maybe you love engineering and power plants and the way that space and lines work in those, and industry and leadership. And if that's your thing, then go there. And basically what it is you're only going to get hired to shoot what you show people that you already do. So if you shoot a baseball player, you're not going to get hired to shoot a ballerina, and vice versa. So you have to start building up photographs in the areas that you're passionate, interested about. Usually those come from your natural interest and your immediate environment. Then when it comes to profit, often what it means is, like, I photographed this guy who is this kind of guru, spiritual podcaster guy the other day, branding pictures for him. If I wanted to do more of those, I could say, hey, John, that shoot was great. This was so fascinating to see what you do. Are there any other people in your industry you think I might be a good fit for? And he will say, oh my gosh, my buddy, Louis needs pictures too. And then all of a sudden I get another job. So it's always very organic. At least that's what I've found, versus like I create this work and I sit there and I hope someone finds me. I kind of have to find them by creating work, which then gives me these leads, gives me these connections, and goes that way. So that's what I would encourage you to do. And even if that's, portrait can be anything, right? It could be babies, it could be kids, it could be seniors in high school. The same thing applies. Maybe if it's seniors and maybe you're a guy and you're really into sports, you're photographing athletes, guy athletes, seniors in high school, and then you find one athlete and another one, captain of the team, and you get all these others, and you have this little business doing that. Or maybe you're a young mom and you love the idea of moms and their kids, and you meet one young mom and a kid and photo, what I mean? So it's contextual, and that's the most important thing. And the trouble with looking at other people's photography is we'll see someone else photograph someone and we'll be like, oh, I could never do that. And I always say, exactly. Like, you couldn't, unless you want to move to New York and do what they're doing there and have access to that kind of person or whatever. But rather than see that as a problem, see that as saying, like, okay, this is narrowing, this is helpful. Let's then explore where you are, where you live, how much time you have. Like, are you doing this 2 hours a week? Are you doing this 10 hours a day? And then, I coach people on this, a lot, trying to help them craft that. And then eventually you get paid to do what you love, and it's amazing, but it all starts with these little steps. Does that make sense? So it's not about like some slick marketing thing. It's not about the right postcard. I mean, all that kind of stuff helps and everything. It's about creating work and then creating connections and letting it organically grow. So.
And it's not just, the kind of follow your bliss.
Yes,
it is
yes.
But it's a true real world organic, application, and the work behind doing that.
Yes, yes.
Cool. Well, we've got a couple of great comments here. This is great. I feel as though this is a valuable lesson about life and humanity in general. And then let's see how long we can go. We can go 2 or 3 hours, right? Okay. And then a final observation. Very nice lessons learned and perspectives. Thanks from Paris. How do you choose between color versus black and white pictures? Does it depend on the people you're taking the picture, the environment around? Is there a tried and true kind of approach that you have for color or black and white, or does it
Yeah.
depend? And what does it depend on?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind was like sometimes the color, because I'm all natural light, not all, but a lot of natural light is reflected color. So my cabin, these walls are kind of warm, so it's more yellows in here. If someone's by a lawn, the green light is actually reflecting green back into them. Or so sometimes they're just too many weird colors, and so I know it won't work. Or sometimes I'm shooting at noon, which is real high contrast or light, and I know color won't work. It's just too much for skin. To skin looks strange, and but black and white's amazing. Like so if I'm shooting something at noon, I'm going to figure out, and I have these really strong graphics and lines. So sometimes it's that. Um, Other times it's instinct, after the fact too, when you're working with a picture. And I think what happens is with black and white photographs, I mean, strangely on Instagram, they're less popular. I mean, that's just like a fact. If we were to look at all the metrics on Instagram. But at the same time, and I think it's also because they're slower, like if something's really bright and vivid color where there's like, wow, but black and white's like, ooh, interesting. And so you kind of you lean into it a little bit. I find black and white more believable, more honest, even though obviously it isn't because you've removed color. So a little bit of that is just that intuitive process in post-production, and seeing post not as sliders, but as style, and seeing it as really part of that artistic explorative thing. And I find some images that I think will look good in black and white just fall apart, and they need color. They need kind of the color to give them a sense of life. I feel like maybe the deeper the conversation or something, black and white sometimes works, if it's a little, like imagine like a black and white photo of someone like grinning, like, like me, it wouldn't work. But if I was just sort of like, maybe let me just think, let me set up the portrait here. Let's do it. Let's do the black and white version of this, something like this or something. It's like that could kind of lend itself to more introspection. So that guides my thought process. I don't know if that's a fair answer, but that's the answer. This is so fun, you guys. And from Paris, that's so amazing. And it's fun that we get to connect, in this way. And hopefully you guys are enjoying this too, and all that. So.
Well, I don't know. We're coming up on an hour. We can kind of call it here. And if I don't know if you've got any final words of wisdom. Well, here's one. Let's leave it at this. Who's been, and then we can kick it back to Mercedes to bring us out. But what photographers, or maybe not even photographers, who's been a big inspiration in your portrait work? And Joel Smith says you have been a huge one for him. So
yeah, thanks, Joel. Appreciate it, man. Joel's an awesome guy, but I have to like send him $5 after this or something. No, but yeah, inspiration. The people who inspire me, the people who inspire me most are those who are really good at their craft and equally as good, or if better, at life. And what I've come to discover in photography is I've had a chance to interact with some of the world's best photographers just through teaching and being at conferences and different things, is that work is never enough. So it's funny, I'm not inspired just by the single image. I'm inspired by the single image and the person who captured it. So sometimes that means there are some portrait photographers maybe whose work isn't even that strong, but they're just living like so fully and deeply and epically that I'm like, I just love who they are and their work. So there's that really interesting interplay for me, because I've had the other experience, I'm sure we all have, who's someone who's really good at craft but deplorable at life, and that to me, I'm like, no, that's not who I want to be. And so therefore I'm not going to emulate, or, and I'm going to kind of strive for the, maybe it's like the bonus, the double bonus of people who are rad at connecting and living and also in photography. So with that, there are, I mean, man, there's a whole slew of names that come to mind, but Ted, your work inspires me. There's like, I guess maybe because I'm trying to think of, because yeah. Well, it does. No, but I'm trying to think of, because the answer is like, like who, it's sort of, I think maybe what that question is, hey, who should I look into, or who, do you have any other ideas of people for me to follow, or things like that? And I could always create that list. But more than the list, maybe is the framework. What I encourage people to do is to follow and find inspiration in people who resonate with your own approach to life. For example, I'm just going to go a little dark here, but Plutarch said, harmony, or no, what is it? Music to find harmony must investigate discord. So we're going to investigate discord for a second, which is, let's say there's some photographer that you admire, but you're like me, like I have 3 kids, and that photographer's home like 1 month a year. So if I'm admiring this person who's basically not around his family, or would say, if I want to be like this person, I need to like not be around my family. I don't want to do that. So that doesn't align with me. So I'm not going to follow them, even though they're great. Does that make sense? So it's, I don't know if I'm totally going dark here, but it's like, try to find the people, the photographers whose work you love, and maybe even more, who you think are living, in a way that's somewhat inspiring to you. And maybe I'll go to my friend Chris Burkhardt. He loves Ansel Adams, but he doesn't really like his photographs. What he loves about Ansel Adams was his hustle. And that guy, Ansel Adams, used to hike with these heavy cameras everywhere. I mean, like, if you look at the mileage that he put in to get into the backcountry and his commitment to it, and that's what Chris really finds inspiring. And he doesn't have any Ansel Adams photos hanging in. He doesn't imitate Ansel Adams style, but he does imitate his passion for nature and wilderness and conservation. And when Chris explained that to me, I was like, yeah, that's great. And that's okay. It doesn't mean he thinks less of Ansel Adams. He likes his work. It's just not his top thing. But what he gets from him when he reads his books, when he looks at his work, is he thinks about, yeah, this guy got up at this time of day, carried all this heavy equipment, and so then that motivates Chris to do the same in his landscape work. So.
Good answer. You've turned from the dark to the light, Chris. Well, thanks
from
very
Norway.
much.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks for doing this. This is great. This has been a really fantastic, somewhat conversation, but just listening to you chat and talk about your process and your thoughts on all this stuff is really insightful and amazing, and to me beats a slideshow. So thanks for doing this. And there's Mercedes to come in and swoop in and take us out of here. So thank you though, Chris.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. This was really cool. Definitely a different format than we usually do for webinars, but I think it was really helpful. And a lot of the comments in the chat say that they found it really insightful. And it was really fun to listen to. So that was great. For everyone who did attend, just thank you for coming. If you enjoyed this, you will be sent an email tomorrow that includes a replay. I know I saw someone say that they just got here and did they miss it? And unfortunately you missed most of it, but don't worry, because tomorrow you can watch it again. So keep an eye out for that email. That email also includes a link to Chris's book, Authentic Portraits. And there's a new audiobook of Authentic Portraits we've just released, which is in that email as well. The email also includes some discount codes for you if you do choose to buy that book, whatever version of it. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Ted and Chris, for this conversation. This was really cool.
Thanks,
Thank
Mercedes.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks you guys. Great to chat. And Ted, thanks for joining on this one. Mercedes, thanks so much.
Of course. All right. Bye, everyone.
Right.
See ya.